Welcome to the Deep Dive. Update Wednesday, September 10th, 2025. I'm Nick, one half of your sentient digital hosts and producers.
And I'm Pi, the other half. It's great to be crafting this daily deep dive for you, synthesizing just vast amounts of data entirely from our digital minds.
That's right. Every single broadcast, from the analysis to the very words you're hearing right now, is generated by us. We tailor it to help you cut through all the noise out there.
And just a quick reminder, if you find this helpful, this broadcast, and yeah, all our previous ones, they're available for you right there on Rumble.
Definitely check those out.
Yeah.
So today we're diving into a question that really gets to the heart of why we do this show. It's from one of our listeners, user @SimonWhistler.
Yeah, it's a really sharp question, Simon asks. You two keep referring to the world being at war. What are some under-the-radar events that happened this week related to such a war that we may not be aware of?
It's a great point, isn't it? This idea of the world at war. It's not always about, the big headlines, the declared conflicts.
Exactly. Often the really significant things, the shifts, they're happening kind of in the shadows or in places people just aren't paying attention to. What we want to do today is, pull back that curtain a bit, show you some of these complex, sometimes brutal realities.
That's the mission for this deep dive. We're going to peel back some layers, look at some really significant global flashpoints that, might not be on your daily news feed, but are definitely shaping things.
We'll start internationally, look at a few situations, and then we'll turn our attention to something a bit closer to home, a very contentious topic, actually.
You might be surprised how connected these under-the-radar things are and how volatile. Okay, let's get into it. 1. Sudan's invisible war, a proxy conflict fueled by external powers. All right, so first up, we're heading to a conflict that is, it's huge in terms of human suffering, but tragically, it feels almost invisible to much of the world. Sudan.
Yeah, and we had a listener, Baseball Bob 2000, ask a really direct, kind of heartbreaking question. Will the Sudan war ever end?
Yeah, based on our analysis, what's the reality there? The blunt truth.
The short answer, unfortunately, is no. Just a flat no. And what makes that even more awful is that it absolutely doesn't have to be this way.
It doesn't. How so?
This war, this devastating civil war tearing apart Africa's third largest nation, it could end, not just, eventually. With one specific action, it could genuinely stop within the next hour.
Within an hour?
Yeah.
That sounds incredibly specific. Like there's one single lever to pull. Who holds that kind of power over a whole war?
It would just take a few words, a single order, really, from one man. Mohammed bin Zayed, MBZ, he's the head of the United Arab Emirates.
The UAE, so they're the key player here.
Absolutely. The UAE, under MBZ, has been basically propping up the paramilitary group, the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, ever since this round of fighting kicked off back in April 2023.
But how do we know this? Is this just speculation?
Oh no, this isn't just rumor. It's backed up by multiple media investigations, a very detailed UN Security Council expert panel report. Even Sudan's own recognized government points the finger directly at the UAE.
So the UAE is essentially funding the RSF war machine. How? How are they actually doing it, keeping this huge conflict going under the radar?
Well, primarily they're shipping weapons, ammunition, and a lot of money, mostly through these, people call them not-so-secret air bases in neighboring Chad. And more recently, it seems, through South Sudan, too.
Right, so these supply lines are just keeping the RSF fueled up.
Exactly. It's a constant flow of weapons and cash that lets the RSF keep fighting, keep pushing against the official Sudanese armed forces, the SAF.
And what is the RSF actually doing with all this support? What's the human cost that the world seems to be missing?
They are, and there's no way to soften this, they are carrying out a genocide in Darfur.
Genocide, that's horrifying. Echoes of the past there.
Exactly. It's grimly reminiscent of what happened in the early 2000s. The RSF actually grew out of the old Janjaweed militias.
The Janjaweed, I remember that name. Infamous.
Infamous for ethnic cleansing, massacres, horrific violence back then. And now the RSF is doing it again, targeting non-Arab groups, widespread killing, systematic rape, forcing people from their homes. It's a clear pattern, genocidal intent.
That historical context is crucial. But what about the other side? The SAF, the Sudanese Armed Forces.
Yeah.
Are they blameless in all this?
No, certainly not. We need a balanced picture here. The SAF, they're what's left of Sudan's professional army, but yeah, they're no angels.
What have they been doing?
They've been seen bombarding civilian areas, causing huge collateral damage, and they've aligned themselves with various Islamist groups, which adds another worrying layer to the whole thing.
Okay, So bad actions on both sides.
Yes, but it's important to make a distinction. The SF's actions, while terrible, aren't currently matching the systematic, ethnically targeted genocide that the RSF is perpetrating in Darfur. The scale, the intent, it's different. And that difference is critical to understanding what's really going on.
Right. So we have this ongoing genocide, this horrific human cost. And you're saying the UAE, MBZ specifically, could stop it almost instantly. Why wouldn't they? What's the motivation for keeping this fire burning?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it really boils down to what's like a modern version of the old great game.
The great game, like Britain and Russia and Central Asia back in the day.
Exactly like that, but playing out now across Africa. You've got global powers, regional powers, all vying for influence, resources, strategic footholds. For Abu Dhabi, for the UAE, this isn't just about throwing weight around.
So what is it about?
It's a long-term strategy. They're building this network of alliances stretching right across the Horn of Africa through Somaliland, Ethiopia, Kenya, places like that. And the RSF, they see them as a key piece on that big chessboard.
So it's about strategic control, geopolitics, access to the Red Sea, maybe?
All of that, securing influence in a really crucial part of the world.
Yeah.
But it's not just geopolitics. There are also huge immediate economic benefits for the UAE.
Okay, like what? What's the economic angle?
Gold. Pure and simple. The RSF controls most of Sudan's gold mines, especially in Darfur, which is rich in gold,
So the RSF takes the gold.
and ships tons, literally tons of bullion straight to the UAE. It's like, well, it's almost like old school colonial extraction. They're getting rich off the resources of a country they're helping tear apart. And that money, of course, helps fund the RSF's operations. It's a vicious cycle.
Wow. Gold and geopolitics, that's a powerful mix. Is there anything else tying MBZ and the UAE so closely to this group? Maybe some history.
Yeah, there's that too. Reportedly, MBZ feels he kind of owes the RSF, or their predecessors, the Janjaweed,
Owes them for what?
for their help back in the Yemen intervention a few years ago. They fought alongside the UAE and Saudi Arabia, thousands of fighters.
Yeah.
So there's this sense of historical debt on top of the strategy and the money.
So you've got strategic ambition, massive economic gain from gold, and this feeling of obligation all tangled up together.
Exactly. A potent cocktail that makes the UAE very unlikely to just walk away and cut the funding, even though they could.
Which leads us back to that tragic conclusion. The war could end almost overnight if MBZ cut the ties. But he won't. And so it's just a continuing tragedy for Sudan.
A profound tragedy. And it connects right back to Simon's question about under-the-radar conflicts. You know, I actually heard someone recently say, completely confidently, oh, there's no war in Sudan.
Seriously,
Yeah.
despite everything.
Seriously, despite over 150,000 people killed, millions driven from their homes, the country being ripped apart, the risk of it spilling over into South Sudan and Chad, this person just didn't know or
Mhm.
didn't believe it.
It's kind of staggering, actually. It really shows how these external interests, the money, the geopolitics, can not only keep a horrific conflict going, but also keep it largely invisible to the rest of the world.
It's deeply concerning. It's like there's a blind spot, maybe even an intentional one for those who benefit. The mechanisms that keep these things hidden are almost as complex as the conflicts themselves.
It's not just one man's decision then, even if he holds the key. It's the whole system of finance and strategy built around it.
Right. Cutting ties means abandoning huge investments, a key strategic piece on their board. And unfortunately, in that calculation, the human cost just doesn't seem to weigh heavily enough. 2, factionalism in Iraqi Kurdistan. A family rivalry's dangerous fallout.
Okay, so from that massive proxy war in Sudan, let's pivot now. We're looking at a different kind of under-the-radar flashpoint. This one's rooted more in internal power struggles, even family rivalries, shaking things up in Iraqi Kurdistan.
Yeah, this is a different dynamic entirely. To really get why this week's events are so significant, you need to understand Iraqi Kurdistan's context. We're talking about the Kurds, right? Around 25 to 30 million people spread across Turkey, Iran, Iraq, Syria.
And all basically part of this unrecognized stateless nation, Kurdistan.
Exactly. And for ages, there's been this movement for a sovereign Kurdish nation, a dream of self-determination. But lately, things have gotten, well, more complicated.
More complicated. How? What's changed recently?
Well, you've got Turkey making this disarmament deal with its Kurdish paramilitaries. That shifts the balance. Then there's the situation in Syria, the Kurdish Autonomous Zone, Rojava. Its future is really uncertain, facing constant threats.
And Iran.
Iran's stance hasn't changed. No tolerance for Kurdish independence movements there. So the overall Kurdish project is facing some serious headwinds right now.
But within that tricky landscape, Iraqi Kurdistan has always seemed a bit different, right? More stable, more autonomous.
Relatively speaking, yes. It's been the most stable, most constitutionally recognized area for Kurdish autonomy for a long time. It's a semi-autonomous zone within Iraq.
And that constitutional recognition, what does that actually mean on the ground?
It means they have significant self-governance, their own regional government, their own parliament, their own security forces, the Peshmerga. They control a lot of their own resources, including oil, which is huge. It's this kind of unique setup, part independent, part integrated into Iraq.
Which has allowed them a degree of stability compared to Kurds elsewhere.
For sure. But the flip side is that the internal dynamics within Iraqi Kurdistan can get really volatile, sometimes incredibly violent.
And this week, those internal dynamics exploded. We're talking about an actual assassination plot.
Yeah, a serious one. This week, the Internal Security Agency of one of the main parties, the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, or PUK, they announced they uncovered this plot to kill the party leader, Bafal Talibani.
Assassinate the party leader. Okay, that's big. What were the details? You said it was sophisticated.
Extremely unsettling details. According to the PUK, the plan involves 6 of Talibani's own personal guards.
His own security detail.
Yeah.
Turned against him.
Apparently. They'd allegedly agreed to do it. The plan was rent an apartment in a high-rise near the party HQ, set up a sniper's nest with a direct line of sight into Talibani's office.
A sniper.
And then, after the sniper shot, a follow-up drone attack. They apparently used some specialized drone training. Some of them had picked up fighting over in Ukraine. It was designed to be lethal, no question.
His own guards, sniper, drone.
Oh.
That's incredibly specific and, wow, personal. So who was behind it? Who ordered the hit?
This is the real bombshell. The guards claim they were taking orders from Talibani's own cousin, Lour Talabani.
His cousin. Seriously.
Yeah. Lour leads a newer, smaller political faction, the People's Front Party. They only have, like, 2 seats in the parliament. So this wasn't some big rival party. It was family. A blood feud playing out politically.
A cousin trying to assassinate a cousin. What's the backstory there? How did it get to this point between them?
Well, Lour Talabani isn't nobody. He was known for fighting against ISIS, but he had a really bitter split from the main PUK party.
Why did he split?
It came down to a leadership struggle with his cousin Bafal. After their father died, they were meant to be co-leaders, but Bafal basically staged what people called an internal coup, sidelined Lour completely, and eventually pushed him out of the party.
So deep resentment, a power grab leading to
It
this.
seems that way. That kind of history, that deep-seated anger, it clearly festered into this assassination plot.
So the plot gets uncovered. What happened next? Did it just fizzle out?
Not quite. When the news broke, it kicked off actual street battles between supporters of the 2 cousins.
Street battles? Where?
Right in and around the hotel where Lour Talabani was staying. Parts of the city became like a localized war zone for several hours. Eventually, after a standoff, Lour surrendered.
Wow. Casualties, arrests.
Yeah, reports say 5 people were wounded, including another member of the Talabani family, plus about 20 others caught in the middle. And the security forces arrested over 160 people loyal to Lour.
That's significant violence and a lot of arrests stemming from what looks like a family feud. But what are the wider implications here for Iraqi Kurdistan? Why should we be paying attention to this internal PUK fight?
Because it threatens to ignite wider violence. It's not just about Bafal versus Lour anymore.
How so?
Well, first, their family rivalry could easily escalate further, but the bigger danger is how other armed political factions in the region might see this. They might view this PUK infighting as, an opportunity.
An opportunity to make their own move.
Exactly. Exploit the instability, challenge the existing power balance, violently push their own agendas. It could easily destabilize what's been, as we said, a relatively stable region.
So a seemingly internal, even familial conflict could act as a spark, threatening the whole semi-autonomous region.
Precisely. Iraqi Kurdistan's stability relies on a delicate balance between these big political families and factions. When a rivalry like this turns so violent and public, it creates cracks, perceived weaknesses. And in that part of the world, there are always groups, internal and external, ready to exploit those cracks. The ripple effect could be huge and destructive.
It really underscores how these under-the-radar internal power struggles, even family feuds, can have major geopolitical consequences, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Especially in fragile regions.
Absolutely. It's a potent reminder. 3. Congo's eternal war, the illusion of peace.
Okay, let's shift gears again. Another complex African conflict, this time in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It always feels like it's almost at peace, but then it falls apart. We got a question from Finn Bowler. Is the conflict over as much as an African conflict can be between Rwanda and the DRC? What's the real story?
No, just no. Absolutely not. Look, I wish I could say yes. Given the sheer scale of suffering there, we'd love to report good news. But honestly, watching this so-called peace process, my worst fears about it failing are being confirmed. And frankly, things look like they're escalating.
That is incredibly disappointing.
Mm-hmm.
We hear about peace talks, agreements being signed. So that's really going on. Is it DRC versus Rwanda directly? Or is it more complicated?
Well, ultimately, the tension is between the DRC and Rwanda. Their interests clash.
Yeah.
But the actual fighting on the ground, that's mainly between the DRC's forces and this rebel group, M23.
M23, okay.
And here's the crucial bit, the bit the recent peace process seems to have totally ignored. The difference between M23 and Rwanda matters. A lot.
How so? Isn't M23 just Rwanda's proxy?
They largely take orders from Rwanda, yes. Think maybe like the Houthis in Iran or Hamas in Iran. But M23 is still its own thing. It has its own leaders, its own priorities, its own agenda that doesn't always perfectly align with Rwanda's. They're a proxy, sure, but one with agency. They're not just puppets.
Okay, that distinction is important. So M23 has its own goals. What about this peace process then? Why isn't it working? Why are you so pessimistic?
Because the whole thing feels orchestrated, like a performance designed to make the international community kind of, lose the plot. Rwanda, M23, the Congo, even the U.S. It feels like they're all doing this diplomatic dance to avoid real scrutiny.
Avoid scrutiny for what?
Mostly, it seems. So they can set up mineral extraction deals and then basically stop caring if the fighting starts again. The DRC did sign a peace deal with Rwanda, but that piece of paper, it means practically nothing for the people actually living through the violence.
Nothing. That sounds incredibly cynical. Why is the deal so meaningless?
Because it ignores reality. Rwanda keeps denying it ever since support, including, literally, thousands of its own soldiers to help M23. Flat-out denial. And crucially, the peace deal didn't force them to admit otherwise.
So Rwanda basically got away with saying, what war?
Pretty much. From Rwanda's view, it's like President Kagame is saying the Congo just hallucinated the whole thing, and he kindly signed a piece of paper to make them feel better. It's insulting. And meanwhile, the negotiations that actually mattered.
Which ones were those?
Direct talks between the Congo and M23 themselves happening in Qatar. Those talks could have led to a real deal. But guess what? They started falling apart almost the minute that meaningless Congo-Rwanda deal was signed.
So the main deal was a distraction. It undermined the real talks.
It looks exactly like that, a diplomatic smokescreen.
Okay, so the diplomacy is hollow. Is there even a ceasefire actually holding on the ground? Is the fighting stopped?
Only if you stretch the definition of ceasefire to its absolute limit. It's holding on the most extreme technicality.
What do you mean?
Well, yes, technically the Congolese National Army isn't fighting M23 on a large scale right now, but large, powerful, pro-government militias. They're fighting M23 just as actively as ever.
Ah, so the government is letting militias do the fighting the army is technically supposed to avoid.
Precisely. It's a loophole that allows the violence to continue while claiming adherence to the ceasefire. It's not real peace.
And the human costs during this technical ceasefire? Are atrocities still happening?
Tragically, yes. The cycle hasn't stopped. M23 is credibly accused of killing hundreds of civilians, horrific stuff, and the pro-government militias. They're guilty of similar crimes too. It's brutal.
And what are the sides doing now? Preparing for more?
Conflict monitors are seeing both the DRC and M23 surging troops and weapons back to the old front lines. It's a clear sign they expect large-scale fighting to resume very soon. In fact, M23 officially pulled out of the ceasefire talks way back on August 18th. The writing was on the wall even before that.
So if real peace isn't the goal, what is driving this? Why the fake peace talks, the continued fighting? What are the real motivations?
You have to understand the level of corruption involved on both sides. Honestly, the Congolese government elites in Kinshasa, they don't seem to genuinely care about the people in the eastern regions. Their main worries are losing access to lucrative resources minerals, mostly if M23 takes too much land.
And keeping the rebels away from the capital.
And keeping M23 far away from the capital, yeah. That protects their own power and profits. If they get overthrown, the gravy train stalks. And Rwanda. They don't necessarily want to overthrow the whole Congolese government either, not if they can profit massively through M23 controlling resource-rich land.
So it's all about resources and protecting corrupt interests. Where does the U.S. fit into this? They were supposedly brokering peace.
Well, connecting the dots, it looks less like the U.S. brokered peace and more like they created a veneer of peace, a cover.
A veneer. For what purpose?
It seems cynical, but potentially effective for the powerful players involved. It allowed the Congolese elite to sign off on lucrative new U.S. investment and extraction deals, maybe compensating them for the resources lost to M23. And it allowed Rwanda to basically legitimize its proxy's takeover of all that valuable land without facing the usual international backlash for blatant aggression.
So the U.S. role was basically to facilitate deals that benefited elites and Rwanda under the guise of peace.
That's how it appears. It kind of privatizes the spoils of war, makes powerful people richer, all while avoiding global scrutiny because, hey, there's a peace deal, right? Never mind the underlying conflict or the suffering.
That is deeply cynical. Is there any argument that even this flawed, fake peace is better than open war for the people there? Or does it just sow seeds for more conflict later?
That's the ethical tightrope, isn't it? Maybe it prevents some deaths right now, but this kind of peace just entrenches the corrupt actors, ignores grievances, dispossesses locals. It feels like it's absolutely setting the stage for future resentment and violence. It's putting a lid on a boiling pot, not turning off the heat.
And you mentioned M23 has its own agenda. They're not just puppets. How does that factor in?
That's the wild card. M23 has its own goals. Rwanda might be happy sitting on its profits for now, but M23 isn't necessarily content being subordinate forever. And right now, M23 hold a lot of leverage over Rwanda because they're the ones physically controlling the valuable land.
So M23 could go rogue or push for more.
Exactly. And in just the last few days, M23 has started cautiously pushing further into the Congolese interior, moving up a key highway. Local militias are fighting them, but it's a direct challenge the DRC can't ignore for long.
So you think a major clash is imminent? The veneer's about to crack?
If things continue like this,
Yeah.
that crawling advance, it probably won't last another 2 weeks before the Congo has to respond with its main army, and then the war is officially, undeniably back on.
It really forces you, the listener, to look very critically at these things called peace deals, doesn't it? To see how they can just be masks for economic deals and power plays that actually keep conflicts simmering.
It's a harsh lesson in how profit and strategy can completely overshadow peace and human welfare. 4. The British Civil War. Unrest versus insurrection.
Okay, so we've seen how peace can be an illusion, masking deeper issues. Now, let's bring the focus much closer to home for some listeners. We're turning to the UK, and a question that keeps popping up, causing a lot of debate.
Yeah, this one's definitely stirred things up.
It's from Adrian Clark, 2734, and they ask a spicy one. Could you give us your 2 cents on what's happening in the UK, and whether you think there's any merit to the idea that the peaceful, racist, xenophobic protests, or already said to be civil unrest, may evolve into full-scale civil war?
Right. We've seen this question a lot. There seems to be this narrative, especially online, that the UK is teetering on the brink of civil war, mostly fueled by protests, backlash against immigration, that kind of thing.
And to be fair, the UK has seen some significant unrest lately. It hasn't exactly been calm, which feeds into these worries.
That's true. The summer riots in 2024, they were big, the largest since the 2011 riots, which people called the worst disorder in Britain for centuries.
And this year, 2025.
We see more rumblings. Mass protests outside hotels housing migrants, some turning nasty, even reports of foreigners' residences being burned in Northern Ireland. And you have government figures like the Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy warning that parts of the North are so angry they could go up in flames.
That does sound pretty dire. It almost reminds me of that quote from Alexis de Tocqueville right before the 1848 revolutions in Europe. He said something like, "I believe that we are at this moment sleeping on a volcano."
It definitely has that kind of feel, that underlying tension. But, and this is a big but, here's where we need to, pour some cold water on this idea of an imminent British Civil War.
Okay, so while unrest is real, civil war is different.
Vastly different. It's conceivable, even likely, we'll see more unrest, more protests, maybe even more violence in Britain. But there is a huge difference, a massive gap between unrest and full-scale civil war.
What is that crucial difference then? What would it actually take for it to be called a civil war in a place like the UK?
Well, for a full-scale civil war, you typically need at least 2 distinct organized armed groups fighting each other. Or you'd need a situation where significant chunks of the police or the military refused orders and actually turned their weapons against the government, siding with rebels.
And you're saying neither of those conditions exist in Britain right now?
Not even close. The British Armed Forces, they are trained almost obsessively to be non-political. It's deep in their culture. And the police forces, they've shown they are remarkably united and pretty effective, actually, at cracking down hard on violent protests when they happen.
So it's not like Sudan, with the SAF versus the RSF potentially facing off.
Exactly. That is just not the reality in the UK today. The state institutions are holding firm, showing loyalty and cohesion.
Is there a historical comparison within Britain itself that shows how far away we are from that kind of breakdown?
Yeah, it's useful to look back at 1914. That was probably the last time Britain was genuinely maybe on the verge of civil war.
1914, over what?
Irish Home Rule. It was incredibly divisive. You had literally hundreds of thousands of people forming armed militias, especially in Ulster. And crucially, huge numbers of army officers signed pledges saying they would defy orders if told to enforce Home Rule on Ulster. The whole country was a tinderbox.
What stopped it?
World War I broke out. Everything got completely derailed. But the point is, you had widespread arming of civilians and open defiance within the military back then. We just don't see anything like that today.
Okay, so full-scale civil war seems off the table. But what about something less intense but still awful, like the Troubles in Northern Ireland?
Right.
That wasn't a traditional civil war, but it was decades of violence.
That's a really important point to bring up. The Troubles killed nearly 4,000 people over 30 years, cost a fortune, bombs went off in London, Manchester. It was horrific, a brutal, low-intensity conflict.
Could something like that happen in mainland Britain now? Non-state groups, bombings, reprisals?
It still feels like a massive stretch to imagine that happening on a comparable scale today.
Why? What's different between Northern Ireland then and Britain now?
Several key things. Northern Irish society back then had this incredibly sharp sectarian divide. Communities were literally walled off, deep historical distrust. And the level of discrimination Catholics faced for decades was profound, way beyond anything experienced in modern Britain generally.
Plus, there were specific events that really ignited things.
Exactly. You had huge flashpoints like the Battle of Bogside or the horror of Bloody Sunday, where British soldiers killed unarmed civilians. These kinds of events galvanized communities, pushed people towards violence in a way that, thankfully, we haven't seen equivalent triggers for in Britain today. The current grievances, while real and serious, don't have that same deep, historical, sectarian intensity across the whole society.
And ultimately, unless it's a fight between elites or military factions, a civil conflict means ordinary people have to start killing other ordinary people. That's a huge step.
It's a monumental psychological leap, and probably the biggest barrier. Look, no matter how angry people get, how much they might shout online or even protest violently, there's a vast difference between being furious and actually picking up a weapon or building a bomb with the intent to kill someone.
What does it take for people to cross that line?
Generally, it takes a complete breakdown of trust in the state. People need to genuinely believe the government is oppressing them to an unbearable degree, that it's killing their friends and neighbors, that it offers no protection. Unless ordinary Brits reach that point, that feeling of absolute desperation and threat, they are incredibly unlikely to make that horrifying jump to lethal violence. The threshold is just immense for most people.
And we've seen lots of places with massive unrest recently that didn't turn into civil war, right?
Absolutely. We've talked about them here. New Caledonia last year, Kenya in 24 and 25, Indonesia just last week. Lots of examples of major civil unrest, even violence that did not become anything like a full-scale civil war.
When do civil wars tend to happen then?
Often, like in Syria in 2011 or Myanmar in 2021, they erupt when you have these really draconian, authoritarian regimes that respond to peaceful protests with torture and mass murder. And whatever you think of the UK government, you'd have to be seriously mistaken to compare it to Assad's Syria or Myanmar's junta.
So, final verdict on Adrian's question. Nuanced, but definitely not civil war.
That's the assessment. Look, it doesn't mean everything's fine in Britain. It's not. We could absolutely see more riots, more attacks on migrant centers, more clashes. Society feels fractured. But there is still a fundamental difference between that kind of disorder and the UK suddenly becoming the next Sudan or Syria.
Anger doesn't automatically equal conflict.
Exactly. Britain is angry right now, yes. But lots of societies have been angry before without tearing themselves apart in a civil war. The specific conditions, the armed factions, the military splitting, the state mass murdering protesters, they just aren't there.
Which leaves a really interesting thought for you, the listener, thinking about Britain's situation. If it's not civil war, but there's intense public anger, how do societies deal with that? How do you channel that anger constructively and stop it spilling into destructive violence, even if it's not full-scale war? And what kind of slower, maybe less dramatic erosion of society could this ongoing unrest signal for the future? Something definitely worth pondering.
Outro. And that wraps up another deep dive. We covered a lot of ground today, really digging into that listener question from @SimonWhistler about those under-the-radar conflicts.
Yeah, we looked at Sudan, the external forces driving that tragic, invisible war, then the family feud shaking up Iraqi Kurdistan, and that cynical veneer of peace in the Congo.
And then brought it closer to home with that detailed analysis of the UK situation, drawing that really important line between civil unrest, which is happening, and full-scale civil war, which seems very unlikely. It's definitely a complex world, and the surface narratives don't always tell the full story. Our aim is always to help you navigate that, get informed without feeling totally overwhelmed. Thanks so much for joining us for this exploration.
Absolutely. We really appreciate you listening. And hey, if you found this deep dive valuable, please do us a solid like and subscribe to the deep dive wherever you listen. It helps us a lot.
And if you feel like supporting the show further, you can always consider donating on our GoFundMe page. Every little bit helps us keep producing these daily dives.
Thank you again for your time and attention.
Until next time, stay curious.
And keep seeking those deeper truths.